Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 8:06. It's our fourth hour of 4 hours of broadcasting, and we're getting it done. Coming up in 60 minutes, we're going to hand it off to Chris Plant, who is, well, he's really just Mercedes' evening host that she likes to talk to. I'm her morning host, and he's the evening host. So I know you're excited about Chris.
I don't get a break. I just do not get a break.
You lucky, lucky woman.
So much work.
I think he's more work than I am.
100%.
Coming up in 30 minutes, we're going to talk about defunding NPR. It's the no-brainiest of no-brainers for Republicans. They should bring the legislation up first thing this morning. Now is the time. Strike fast, strike hard. Defund NPR. That's coming up. But right now, we are joined by the amazing, the incredible, the brilliant, the kind, the gentle, the kick-ass KT McFarland. Hey, KT. Morning. I had to pause because I wasn't sure I could say that word, but I can. I'm allowed. I just don't want to dwell on it. Good morning, KT.
Good morning. I'll come on every day if you talk about me like that.
Yeah, right.
Well, we need someone to kick a little A in this White House because when Iran launched this unprecedented act of war against Israel over the weekend, I thought, okay, well, finally now we'll have some moral clarity from this White House because it's obvious who the good guys and bad guys are. Now it turns out not only is it all muddled, and they're still putting pressure on Israel to moderate how they defend their country, but it appears that the Biden administration knew about this ahead of time and did nothing, KT.
Yeah, I guess what struck me as pretty unusual was I really gotten to the point where I thought the Biden administration would just abandon Israel, like the far left of the Democrat Party has. So that when Iran attacked, and this comprehensive attack, and from Iranian territory to Israel territory, that's an act of war, big act of war, that the Biden administration, in fact, was part of the coalition that defended Israel. And I was surprised at that. I thought that they would prevaricate, sort of wait and see what happened, whatever. But they did join in defending Israel, and it was that attack was thwarted. But now the hard part comes, because Biden has said, Israel, it's over, don't do anything else, or we're not going to support you. And yet Israel has kind of a two-front war, right? One that's getting attacked from Iran proper, and Iran has, 4 or 5 times as many missiles and drones left to do more attacks against Israel, and has threatened that they will use those if Israel so much as makes a peep. And then the second front Israel has is still in Gaza. Does Israel go back into Gaza, into Rafah in the southern part of Gaza, and wipe out Hamas? And so I guess there's just a lot of confusion in my mind about, well, what is Israel supposed to do? Are they supposed to not go after Hamas now? Are they supposed to not respond to Iran if Iran attacks? Is Iran going to have a volley of missiles and drones coming the minute the Israelis sort of stick their heads out from under the parapets? And is Joe Biden now going to sit on the sidelines?
Yeah, no, KT, you're absolutely right. And I think that when you have Tehran, that they've warned of severe retaliation to any new Israeli attack, this could mean using weapons they've said that they've never used before that could actually penetrate the missile defense system of Israel. It places Israel in a tough position. What can you foresee Benjamin Netanyahu and his top military officials? What do you think they're going to plan for?
Well, they're in a tough spot because they know they've got to destroy Hamas. They know they've got to stand up to Iran, or the attacks just keep coming. Iran now smells blood. And if Iran thinks, well, we've driven a wedge now between the United States and Israel, now we go in for the kill. And so that's when Iran would unleash all of the proxies, go after Israel. And if the United States doesn't stand with Israel in such a situation, I can't imagine other countries will do so. But if I could just do an aside shout-out to my former boss, Ronald Reagan, and say thank you for the Strategic Defense Initiative, for the Star Wars proposal. I was intimately involved with that. I wrote the first draft of this president's speech declaring our objective of developing a missile shield for the United States. And it turns out we never pursued it for various reasons, political reasons largely, after the Soviet Union collapsed. But Israel was smart enough to see the value of a missile defense shield. And that's what has saved Israel. I hope the United States get smart and we develop a missile defense shield as we should have 40 years ago.
Katie, I mentioned this. I was filling in for Mark Levin Monday evening because he was in Jerusalem when this attack happened. I was filling in for him, and I mentioned on the air, thank God for the Iron Dome, thank God for Ronald Reagan for initiating the Strategic Defense Initiative. And by the way, Joe Biden in the 80s voted against it and was an outspoken critic of it. And somebody replied to me on social media and said, seriously, Biden voted against Iron Dome? So I had to, I knew that was a fact, but I just wanted to pull up the contemporaneous quote. This was Senator Biden at the time voting against funding SDI. I'm going to quote him. President Reagan's continued adherence to SDI constitutes one of the most reckless and irresponsible acts in the history of modern statecraft. That was Senator Joe Biden, the visionary at the time, and that technology protected innocent Israelis by the thousands this weekend. It's been said before, KT, but he truly has been wrong on every issue his entire career.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a long track record of being wrong.
Yes, it's a long career.
It's a long career. I would also point out that if Ukraine had an Iron Dome missile defense shield, they'd be in a very different position today than they are.
Yeah.
Let me ask.
Go ahead, Mercedes, please.
So I know that the House is looking to move forward on these foreign aid bills. Obviously, there's funding for Ukraine, funding for Israel, funding for Taiwan. What's your sense of what's going to happen there on the Hill?
Well, I certainly hope that they have funding for Israel, because Israel can't survive without the United States backfilling its weapons, without the United States sharing intelligence. I mean, even if President Biden decides to abandon Israel, and Israel has to stand alone, Israel will need some aid. The other question, though, is Ukraine. The path that the administration has chosen is not sustainable. We've spent, $100 billion helping Ukraine. I mean, the noble, brave, courageous people of Ukraine. And yet the best they've been able to do is draw a stalemate or a war of attrition, say even. So how do you win this war? I mean, nobody in Washington, including the Pentagon or anywhere else, thinks that Ukraine can win this war in the sense of repelling Russia, pushing Russia out of the country, getting Russia out of Ukraine. But yet they're continuing to support another forever war with no goal in sight. I mean, I really think that if we could keep Ukraine alive until a new president comes in with a very different idea of how to solve Ukraine, that would be the best thing. Because Trump has a plan. His plan for Ukraine is to call up, and he said this publicly. I think he said it at CPAC, Mercedes, where he said, I'm going to first phone call. The first thing I'm going to do is close the border and drill, baby, drill, drive the price of oil down, bankrupt Russia. Then later in the day, I'm going to call Putin and I'm going to say, you go to the negotiating table, or I'm giving Ukraine offensive weapons. And then he's going to call Zelensky and say, unless you go to the negotiating table, I'm going to stop your weapons supply. So he forces both countries to go to the table, cut some kind of a deal, which nobody will be happy with, but everybody gets enough. And then once the killing stops, as President Trump says, then you start rebuilding, and you rebuild Ukraine. The world will rush in to rebuild Ukraine. Within a couple of years, Ukraine will be prosperous, fully integrated into the Western economy. Meanwhile, after the killing stops, where's Russia 5 years after the killing stops? My gosh, they'll be bankrupt because of low oil prices. They won't have any allies except China and maybe Iran. And it's a very different place. I don't think Ukraine can win the war, but I do think they can win the peace. And that's the goal I would have.
KT McFarland, it's nice to hear coherent national security and foreign policy things coming from somebody these days. God, we need you back there on that wall. Hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. Great talking with you, my friend.
Honor and pleasure. Thank you.
8:15.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live.
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
WMAL. Making sense of education. Because what's happening in your kid's school matters. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
So Joe Biden's uncle was eaten by cannibals, and I am shocked that I didn't know this until now. As we just mentioned, he's had a pretty high-profile political career for over 50 years, president, vice president, United States senator, bumbling fool. But I would think that at this point I would have heard that his Uncle Bozy, was eaten by cannibals. But here, he told the story a couple of times yesterday. It was a twofer about the cannibal story. First, he was speaking with steelworkers in Pittsburgh who were pretty much, what's the word for it, held hostage, trapped in the room. They couldn't go anywhere. They had to sit there and act like they enthusiastically supported Joe Biden while he rambled on the stage with a little drool cup underneath his chin to catch the saliva coming down off of his face to the ground. And he told the story about his uncle being captured in the South Pacific during World War II and then eaten by other humans.
And my uncle, they called him Ambrose Brosey, they called him Bosey. My Uncle Bosey was a hell of an athlete, they tell me, when he was a kid. And he became an Army Air Corps before the Air Force came along. He flew those single-engine planes as reconnaissance over war zones. He got shot down in New Guinea, and they never found the body because there were a lot of cannibals for real in that part of New Guinea.
If you're the ambassador to New Guinea right now, what kind of damage control are you doing right now? It's like, no.
I don't even. This is like the craziest story. It's like, I think we had talked about it. It's literally, you see the president of Haiti who's like a cannibal, apparently a cannibal.
Yeah.
So he must have linked the two. There's got to be a combination between Haiti and New Guinea and his Uncle Bosey. And it makes no sense why he would bring up this story. He tried to then criticize Trump on how Trump treats military veterans. It's like, what does Uncle Bosey has to do with Trump?
Right.
Well, he must have been, and he told the story over and over again. I'm telling you, this is
apparently the chief of the cannibal tribe that ate his Uncle Bosey back there in World War II was named Corn Pop.
And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys.
Yeah, but little did we know that they actually ate human beings. That's how bad they were.
Corn Pop the cannibal.
It's like they're running the streets of Haiti right now. Yeah. So reporters caught up with him at the airport on the tarmac and said, "What the hell were you talking about with your uncle?"
Well, they called him Uncle Bosey. He was shot down. He was an Army Air Corps.
He went on and told the exact same story as if he hadn't just told it an hour before. Meanwhile, while he was inside talking to steelworkers, outside were his friends, his allies, his political base, pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist demonstrators. That's a lot different than the little kids on the streets of Harlem screaming, "I love you, Trump," to Donald Trump when he went to visit that bodega, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is unexpected. I think for the Biden administration, they're shocked that these anti-Israel protesters, these pro-Hamas terrorist sympathizers, keep targeting Biden. And so this is why Biden is so careful on how he handles this Israel issue. Right.
Listen, he needs a handful of votes in Michigan to win re-election, so he's going to ruin and dump on our longstanding ally in what may be the most strategically important region in the world, the Middle East. But, he's got to win Michigan. So, by the way, you know how Biden always likes to talk about how he's from Pennsylvania, right? Pennsylvania.
Yes.
In fact, do you remember what
values?
You remember what city he's from there? He talks about it all the time.
Scranton, right?
Is it what now?
Scranton.
Scranton? Oh, yeah, so I thought it was Scranton, too.
But
for
it's
all
not.
this time, which is, by the way, where Dunder Mifflin is located, of course, the paper company in The Office. Scranton. We all thought it was Scranton. Everybody thought it was Scranton. But no, Joe Biden, being a native of there, he knows how to pronounce it properly.
When I walked out the door in North Washington Avenue in Scranton.
It's just a
with
stutter.
Uncle Bosey.
It's just
He's
a
with
stutter.
Uncle Bosey
Mercedes.
walking out in
Scranton.
Scranton.
Uncle Bosey. By the way, that every time he steps on his tongue, it's called his stutter.
A
right?
stutter.
He's got a major stutter problem. Yeah. Well, listen to how his stutter problem manifests itself in talking about his communications with Israel and about how he had advised them not to move on Rafah. Now, Rafah, of course, is a city in Hamas. But, his stutter got in the way of his brain functioning properly. So instead it came out like this.
And I made it clear to Israelis, don't move on Haifa. It's just not, anyway, I just, look what we did recently.
Yeah.
when Israel was attacked.
There you go. Look what we did. So Haifa, of course, is an Israeli city, I think the third largest city in the nation. And he made it clear that they shouldn't move on their own city.
But here's the deal: the White House is going to protect him. They'll fix up they'll clean up his mess. It's what they do all the time. He meant to say Rafah. It's a disaster. We all know this. And if the American voter does not wake up and say, we are putting our national security, we are putting our safety in the hands of a man who can barely put a sentence together, I don't know what to think anymore.
Of course the White House is going to protect him. That's what they're paid to do. My bigger issue is Jake Tapper and George Stephanopoulos are going to protect him.
Oh, absolutely.
It is 8:23.
Making sense of your world.
Appreciate what you do.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
I completely agree with what you're saying.
Making sense of the news. Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:37 now, O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here on this Thursday morning. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Mercedes Schlapp. Mercedes, in 30 minutes, Chris Plant is going to be in the studio. Are you ready for that?
Oh, boy. No, we're never ready for that, are we?
Never ready. Well, it is a small studio, too. It's like we're all sitting on top of each other. It's very cramped. It's not like the palatial studios that NPR enjoys downtown on K Street. Boy, they've got a beautiful studio, and they've got a great new CEO. Here's what she has to say about, telling the truth versus trying to push a political agenda.
Perhaps for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth might not be the right place to start. In fact, our reverence for the truth might be a distraction that's getting in the way of finding common ground and getting things done.
There you go. That's the new person in charge of federally taxpayer-funded NPR, Catherine Maher. She's the new CEO. But she's just a symptom of the problem. Getting rid of her doesn't fix what's going on at NPR. Uri Berliner last week wrote an essay at the Free Press. He's a longtime, over 25-year veteran as a business editor for NPR, and he blew the whistle. As a liberal, by the way. He is a liberal, but he said, we've become the Borg over here. We have one mindset, one opinion, no diversity. There are no Republicans here. No one's allowed to have a different opinion, and something's got to change. Well, for his efforts, he was suspended without pay. Yesterday, he resigned. And all of this is just remarkable and fascinating and something to criticize. And if it weren't for the fact that we are paying for this, Mercedes, with our tax dollars, and I don't understand, Republicans should write the legislation right now and begin the discussion of defunding NPR today. There needs to be no more contemplation about this. No more tax dollars, not one penny more to NPR.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned this earlier, but it's running this as part of the political campaigns across the country on how can you support this institution, this well-funded institution that is simply pushing left-wing propaganda, that they're intolerant of those in the middle and those on the right. And there are no conservative voices on NPR. And look, they've been in these scandals before where they got rid of Juan Williams, and that was a big scandal back in the day.
Juan Williams was too conservative for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about that.
And now, but then this CEO, she is absolutely insane. She comes from Wikipedia, which, as we know, is completely, talk about disinformation and pushing a particular narrative. That's all they do. Yep. It's all about coordinating censorship. And I think that she has done such a disservice, in addition to what we're seeing in the leadership at NPR, where they're, quote unquote, trying to be tolerant and bring in diverse audiences, but at the expense of getting rid of, or not even having, any diversity of thought, any real debate or discussion on this issue. And they are so anti-Trump, so anti-conservative, so anti-Republican, that taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for this.
Absolutely not. And for everybody who says, oh, well, even if they pass it in the House, then the Senate will block it. Good. Make Tim Kaine explain to Virginians who are having trouble getting eggs and milk and hamburger on the table right now. Make Tim Kaine explain why taxpayers should pay for a news outlet that, by the way, they don't seem to have any trouble making money on their own. If you look at their offices, look at their staff size, look at the private chefs they have, look at the money that they're wasting over there. Trust me, there's one thing that we know about over here. It's how to produce radio content. And I promise you, they're spending way too much money doing it. And they're doing that because they don't have to worry about market considerations. But listen, let them go nonprofit. Take out the government funding. They can continue to sell their tote bags in exchange for a $100 donation. The left will support them through their charity instead of through my tax dollars, and make Tim Kaine defend that. I'd love to see him.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard for any Democrat to defend this, especially when you're talking about the fact that it was the Russia hoax story that, you know, Adam Schiff lied. He said he had all this evidence, and then what happens? He doesn't have the evidence. And then what happens? NPR doesn't even clean up their record on this. Right. They don't clean up their reporting on this. You know, there's this obsession with systemic racism that they talk about at NPR. Yeah. They're using all this woke language, again, not connecting to the everyday American out there.
In a moment, we'll play the audio of Uri Berliner. He's the whistleblower who started this conversation last week, led to his resignation after he was suspended without pay. We'll play that for you in a moment. But what you just said there, it's going to be hard for Democrats to defend it. That's why Republicans need to do this, right? I mean, why should they spend the next 6 months leading up to November on the defensive about abortion? Come up with some things that they need to be on the defensive about, all right? Number one. And number two, when you said, you know, Russia, and the pushing of the propaganda of Russian collusion, that's exactly why Democrats want NPR to be there. Because they literally do the propaganda work for them. But here's the thing. They don't need to spend our tax dollars on NPR to do it, because MSNBC and CNN and ABC and the Washington Post, they're doing it for free. It's 8:43. Oh, yes. All right, let's take a listen just to remind you. And again, Republicans, please, you need a win. This is a layup. It's a slam dunk. Defund NPR. Not one tax dollar, not one penny of our tax dollars should go to fund this disaster, this left-wing propaganda unit. And if Democrats want to stop you, great. Make them defend this. Make them explain why in this era where people can get a podcast about fishing in Antarctica, they can get a podcast about underwater basket weaving in Kenya. You can get a podcast about anything. Why do we need to be paying for NPR to create audio content for people to listen to? If they want it, go to the free market. If it's that good, they'll be able to sell it. They do very well. I'm not going to lie. They make fine product. It's not my cup of tea, but it's well produced because they've got some pretty good budgets to work with. Make them compete in the free market and stop paying with our tax dollars. Make Democrats defend that notion. Here is Uri Berliner reminding you exactly the kind of bias and political propaganda that you are currently paying for and that Democrats are defending.
After a while, we started covering Trump in a way that like a lot of legacy news organizations, that we were trying to damage his presidency, to even find anything we could to harm him. And I think what we latched on to was Russia collusion, like a lot of news organizations, which was, as I write, sort of catnip, although it was just rumors and a lot of it based on pretty shoddy documents or evidence. It wasn't really solid, but I think it was compelling. And for us, you know, I think a lot of newspapers, you know, use documents or anonymous sources. We really latched on to Adam Schiff. He was like our muse to the Trump collusion story.
That's right. And Adam Schiff claimed that he had this secret knowledge and it was all a lie. And you know what? Being on the left, being a reporter at NPR means never having to say you're sorry.
No, exactly. And they would never take the other side. It was always to convict, to prosecute Donald Trump on anything that he did. It's a huge disgrace. But you did mention, Larry, about the Republicans defunding NPR. Well, Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee is will plan to propose new legislative action that would threaten to cut the NPR's federal funding. So, you know, the Republicans are listening, and they know that this has to get done. We have to stop with this state-run propaganda. It is destructive. This shows and really unravels how the left is dominating these many of these media institutions, and it's truly destructive. And it's destructive to the First Amendment, which obviously this NPR CEO has no respect for.
You mentioned Senator Blackburn's bill in the Senate, and apparently I mentioned this on Twitter last night, or X. What are we calling it? The Musk site. I mentioned this, how Republicans should defund NPR. Representative Claudia Tenney of New York responded to me and said that she is taking up Blackburn's bill in the House as well. So they're hoping to bring it up for a vote tomorrow. Very cool. Very good. And that's exactly what needs to happen. One more reminder of what Uri Berliner described. And again, he is a liberal. He is a man of the left. He is an editor at NPR, blowing the whistle on all of this. And here's what he said the newsroom culture is like.
At one point, I got so frustrated with what I saw was the lack of different perspectives in our coverage that I decided to look at voter registration among our staff. And what I found was 87 registered Democrats on our editorial staff, 0 Republicans. I presented this at a all hands or a large news meeting, and I said, hey, look, something's gone wrong here.
Yeah, something's going wrong. And again, we're paying for it, but not for long. Republicans can achieve one of two things here. They can actually defund NPR, which would be a beautiful thing, so that our tax dollars are no longer paying for this. Or they can make Democrats be on the defensive and explain back in their districts why those hardworking people that they represent have to pay to keep NPR going. Either way, kind of a political no-brainer, Republicans. You need a win. Take the W. It's 8:52.
A Better Life with Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
That's a wrap, Mercedes. Thank you for your contribution this morning.
I try my best. Thank you for having me.
My voice held out. I'm excited.
You did. You did so great.
I will not speak again for 21 hours. Here comes Chris Plant.
This will be a record.
It's not going to happen. It won't happen. Hey, Chris.
Another record. We're setting records all over the place, aren't we? It's an amazing world. I love that Joe Biden. Don't you love that Joe Biden?
The cannibal situation.
I love the cannibal story.
Sure.
He's.
You'd think you'd have heard that one bit. You know, if a family member of yours was eaten by other human beings, wouldn't we have heard about that by now?
Might have heard about it. But Joe Biden's got a lot of stories to tell, and not much time to tell them. Not to put too fine a point.
I mean,
but
sure, I guess
remarkable
that's true.
stuff. You got that.